What am I? With my magnetic nose ring and fair trade organic vegan fisherman pants. The universe lies within me. The reverb is with me. With my overpriced bandana slapped around my dreads, I am one with the reverb. But what if it couldn't be? What if I am the reverb? What if the reverb is everything? What if everything is reverb?
Howdy doody buckaroonies, and welcome back to another episode of Dollar Shadow VPN McMustache presents Noise Noise Sound Sound Power Hour. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at the topic of convolution, and unlike your average pseudo-intellectual Wokahontas, convolution is both useful and interesting. Unlike other more advanced sound design techniques and approaches, convolution is just as easy as it is powerful, which makes it a whole lot of fun to explore. So with that, I would love for you to consider this a homework assignment for yourself to go out and try this week. And of course, as usual, if you make something cool with these techniques, feel free to share it with me on social media or the Discord, because I always love to hear what you're out there doing and what you're up to. Before we go digging around in the giblets here, we should probably answer the big question. The f*** is convolution, and why should I care? Convolution is typically used to create things like reverb effects, but more technically speaking, it's actually a form of cross-synthesis because it works by taking a look at two signals, the input and what is called the impulse response. Impulse responses are a signal captured from an acoustic space like a room or concert hall, or even something like a hardware reverb from a guitar pedal or a piece of outboard gear. When we run the signal through the impulse response, the two signals are combined. The frequencies that they share get emphasized, and the frequencies that they don't share are reduced. The other consideration with convolution, though, and what makes it interesting, is how these frequencies change over time with things like their amplitude and phase relationships. In a way, it's a lot like using a tape delay, where each tap of the delay comes back a little bit darker than before, just on a much more complicated scale, and that's what's historically made convolution so CPU intensive. But as computers and stuff have gotten more powerful, convolution has become a lot more accessible, and many major DAWs even come with a convolution plugin built in. Because convolution can essentially act as a very fancy EQ, it's often used for other applications with things like guitar amplifier modeling software, where impulse responses are used to recreate the sounds of different cabinets and speaker configurations, or model pieces of hardware, or even model different types of microphones. And when you think about it, what convolution is really doing is imparting the characteristics of one sound onto another. And when you realize that literally any sound can be used as an impulse response, the doors start to open a bit, and that's what we'll be exploring here today on a bit more of an abstract level. The next big question is, well, how do we get started with convolution? Really, this is as simple as bringing a convolution plugin into your session. In this video, I'm going to be using the Kilohertz Convolver plugin because it's very affordable, it's very lightweight and CPU efficient, unlike a lot of other convolution plugins, and it has the added benefit of loading, or at least attempting to load whatever you throw at it, which is awesome. It's also capable of some more interesting stuff with the rest of the Kilohertz ecosystem, but we'll be exploring that more in a bit. Convolution is a super powerful tool, and it's a really easy way to totally reshape the feel and vibe of a track. So to demo this, I wanted to just run through using convolution on a little demo track I've created here. So I've loaded up my convolution reverb plugin on a drum loop, which currently sounds like this. And we can select an impulse response. The Kilohertz Convolver comes with a lot of different sounds, so I've started in just the real spaces because this is typically what you hear convolution used for, is reverb. So this is a recording of a church. If we push that to wet, we can also do some other things like shape the tone and make it brighter. Or maybe go darker. That's really big and boomy. We can add feedback. We can stretch out the impulse response to make it longer and add like a bigger decay time, basically. But you hear it also reshapes the tone of the impulse. And on the inverse, if we shorten it, it's going to become brighter, but also higher pitched. Now that almost sounds like a stairwell or something. We can even fade in and fade out the impulse response. Stretch it. And just from that one recording, which is a church reverb, we've got a lot of different sounds and timbres we can pull from it, but convolution goes way beyond this. If we take a look at some of the other available impulse responses, I think you'll start to get a better idea of what convolution is capable of. Let's maybe go into the synthetic category. We could go to delays. Maybe even experiment with like phase. We could do guitar cabinets. And we can even experiment with things like instrument recordings. So we could run this drum loop through the sound of an electric guitar, which can get very loud. I will warn you right now that tonal impulse responses are dangerous, so always use a limiter. But we could even do a chord. And that sounds super cool. So I think you get the idea. There's a lot you can do with convolution. So let's hear this more in context. To spice this up a bit, I'm gonna swap out this impulse response with another drum loop that's at the same tempo as my project. So I'm gonna drag that in, and once we play that with our drums, we should get something pretty cool. It's almost like a really weird delay. Moving on to the second percussion track, I've loaded another factory response from the Kilohertz Convolver. Got this really cool kind of trippy, dubby delay thing going on. On this first synth layer, I loaded the fireworks patch, so dry, it sounds like this. But if we bring this in, we get kind of a nice crackly texture on the transients of the synth line. Finally, on this last layer, I've got another factory response here, which is like a glitchy delay thing. If we bring that in, we just get this kind of new timbral delay sort of effect that's really different than what you can get with more traditional effects in the DAW. Putting it all together, before any convolution is applied, this is our loop. So that doesn't sound bad, but if we bring in all of that convolution stuff we've got going here, we get this. And I think that's a really powerful creative tool that adds just this extra finesse to a production and makes things sound really interesting and powerful, but it's not all that much work. Now, this is all well and good, but how do we make this idea more interesting? To get started, really it's as simple as loading in your own recordings, and the Kilohertz Convolver will try to convert whatever you throw at it. In testing it, pretty much anything I would load in would load, even really long files, which allowed for some really weird sonic explorations. There are a lot of different things you can do with convolution by using unconventional sounds like tapping on a table, using the sound of a shower running or recording the ambient noise outside your window and using that as your impulse response. The other idea is to explore things like timbre instead of time, with things like very short metallic hits to make drums or sounds feel more metallic, or even using something simple like using drum one-shots as the impulse response. Of course, as well, don't forget that convolution isn't limited to just reverb. You can also explore rhythmic phrases and textures to add some interesting character to your sounds, and that's a lot of fun. You could load in drum loops or even make your own rhythmic patterns and load those in and see what you get. So on that note, we should probably talk briefly about how to make your own impulse response in a bit more of a professional way. There are two primary methods to capturing an impulse response. Number one being the sine sweep method, where we use a sine tone generator, a speaker, and some calibrated microphones to accurately capture the sonic characteristics of a space or a place. Or there's just the simple transient method, which I prefer because it's a little bit more quick and dirty, and it's also just a lot more convenient. Really, you just need anything that will generate a short burst of broadband noise to capture the way that sound interacts in that acoustic space. With the transient method, it's really convenient to capture this with just about anything. So typically I just use a field recorder and the built-in microphones, or a field recorder with some external microphones if it's appropriate to have that kind of setup on me. Back in the studio here, let's try out some of the impulse responses that I've recorded. Now, with the mighty power of convolution in your hands, the question remains, where do we go from here? So I wanted to share a couple quick and interesting ideas you can try to explore this a bit further. One really fun idea is chaining multiple impulse responses together and changing the mix of them to blend these ideas together. And you can even automate things like the mix or tone or feedback over time to alter the way these impulse responses feel. And it's a really powerful idea. So first up, I've got just a recording of hitting a pan in my kitchen. So the dry loop first. Let's bring in the pan. Which is a bit goofy, but trust me, this gets way cooler. Next, I've got another factory response from Convolver. Just adding some space. And then one of the more special effects impulse responses at the end of that. So this is going 1 into 2 and 2 into 3. And at the end, and I think you get the idea. That alone is incredibly powerful. Building off that last idea, you could use something like the free kilohertz snap heap to create even more powerful and complex convolution processing chains. So here I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 convolution reverbs and ensemble cores, 2 filters controlled by an LFO, a pitch shifter, a distortion, and a delay. This is all routed in series, so I can start running my drum loop through this. So let's start with the dry drum loop and start bringing these into here. What this can do. So that is where things start to get really interesting, I think. With these complex processing chains, you can really push convolution to its limits and get so many different textures and timbres and ideas going on a single sound to where it doesn't even sound like the original sound that much anymore. It has just a whole life to it that, again, is really hard to get any other way. Another fun idea is experimenting with multi-band convolution. So here I've got multi-pass up, which allows me to band split the sound into up to 5 bands. So I've added an impulse response to all 3 bands, but a different one on each, as well as some additional processing to each of these bands. So if we back off all this stuff, we'll start bringing it in and hear what is happening. So I've got a different impulse on the low band, the mid band, and the high band, and I can use that to create different things that suit that bandwidth more. So as a quick example, on the high end here, I've got this really bright convolution thing going on with some distortion to make the highs a bit more crispy and some additional delay just to enhance the percussiveness. Analyzing the mid band, I've used this one, which just added this nice room to things. It felt like the drums were actual real acoustic drums rather than just like pure digital synthesized drums. And finally, on the kick, I've just used an impulse response of a bass cabinet to add this nice sense of reality to the kick. Again, it just makes it feel like more of an actual drum rather than a synthesized sound. So put it all together and... which again, I think is pretty neat. Of course, there are any other number of ways that you could expand on this idea with things like mid-side convolution or multi-channel convolution if you're working in a surround sound environment, or any combination of any of the techniques we've used here today to create something totally new with just a little bit of trial and error and a little bit of fun along the way. And again, I think that's the biggest thing about this to me. Convolution is just as powerful as it is easy, and that is the real value of understanding and utilizing it in your work. And so that is a look at the power of convolution. It's super fun, it's super easy, and it is extraordinarily powerful and a really great way to make some sounds that you probably just can't create otherwise. So definitely consider this as, I guess, a bit of a challenge for yourself this week to go out and try this and see what you can create. Of course, if you end up making something cool, feel free to share it with me on social media or the Discord. That wraps everything up for this video, so thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something, and as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.